Anything that allows us to have life, we tend to call good. Anything that brings death tends to call bad. But of course, there's situational ethics with that that's thrown out the tube. In all probability in your life, somebody's come up to you and projected onto you a label that that's bad, or that's good, and that's right, or that's wrong. Or they've somehow projected their evaluation onto you according to their values, what they think their morals or society's ethics is onto your life. And they use that sometimes in order to guilt trip you or to maybe give you pride or shame, even. But what is this thing called morality and the ethics that come with it? I've been blessed to study a lot of books on that topic, and I've been fascinated by the labels people put on people. We all had a situation in our life where we've had something that we thought was terrible. It's a bad thing. And then a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we turned out, hey, I'm so grateful that happened now. I can see that that was a turning point in my life, and it brought me independence or brought me demand or creativity or something. And then we thought, well, maybe it's not as bad as we initially thought it was. Or we maybe bought this house, or we thought this was, oh, this is a great thing and everything else. And then over the months and years, we realized this friggin' house, it's a sinkhole. It's costing a fortune. And we think, well, we discovered there's another side to it. So we sometimes impulsively or instinctually immediately project an evaluation onto things at first, thinking that's what it is, when in fact, there may be two sides to it. If you go around the world, as Montaigne, a French philosopher, did, he went around and he was trying to find a universal morality. Never did he find it. There were a few things that were pretty common to some countries, but in some countries, you go to some places, South Africa, for instance, there's some of the leaders were married to multiple wives. In America, you go to prison for it. What's good and a sign of strength in one place is considered evil in another. And sometimes in the 1960s, drugs you put to prison for, or go to jail for, and now it's legalized. So humans come up with these moral constructs that are sometimes transient, sometimes long-lasting, and they change. They change in location, they change in time. So spatially and temporally, they're different. So they're not universal laws, they're human moralities. And what usually happens is if you look very carefully in your life, if you have children particularly, if they do something that really challenges you, you tax the rules and put on more rules. Thou shalt not do this. And if they do something to support your values, you lax the rules. You see this in the market cycles in business. You see the banks laxing and taxing the rules going on as the markets go up and down. And this is our nature. When we feel supported, we lax those rules, those moralities. And when we feel challenged, we put those things tighter. So where do these things come from? Where are these ideas of evaluation? See, every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values that are unique to them. And no two people have exactly the same set. There may be some labels, well, family may be important, but the details of the family are different. We have what is called similars and difference. We have similar values, but not exactly the same. They're different. So no two people have the same set of values, and they evaluate and project their values onto their experiences. Their perception, decisions, and actions are projected by these values. And so with two people with different values, they're going to have different ideas of what right and wrong, good and bad, pleasurable or painful things are. And this creates sort of a challenge. If you're married, you'll see that the way one wants to raise the family or the children, it may be different than the way the other one. And one will think, well, that's crazy. Well, no, that's crazy. And they'll evaluate each other that way. But in all, if you go to 1,000 families, they're all over the place. There's a spectrum of values. In fact, there's a law called the law of heuristic escalation. Whenever a group of people want to promote something, an idealism in society by an ideologue, an equal and opposite group emerges, kind of like a pro-abortion or pro-life and pro and anti-abortion. And you have pro-guns and anti-guns and pro-democrat and anti-democrat and pro-capitalism and anti-capitalism and Lord knows how many pairs of opposites. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said that all pairs of opposites come and have a common unity, but they all are paired. And there's in society, there's somebody that has it. I remember reading a book by William Burr, on contradictions of the Bible. Even the biblical writings, the old traditional Old Testament, New Testament, had hundreds of contradictions, filled with contradictions. Go read it. The contradictions of the Bible. It says, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt do this. Don't do this, God does this, God doesn't do this. The complete opposite. So it matches all the variations in society's values. So it's easy to want to project our values onto somebody and label them, if they challenge us, bad, evil, wrong, or if they support our values, good and pledgeful and right. And so we can put those values on there. But the question is can we see beyond that? Is there a meta-ethical state? Is there something that goes beyond that? I've been teaching the breakthrough experience, one of my signature programs, for 34, 35 years now. And one thing I'm pretty certain about that happens in that program is people come in with a resentment to somebody or an infatuation that they label bad or good, negative or positive. And then all we do is ask them questions that make them observe information that they were unconscious of. I don't make them make anything up. I don't want them to look something that's not there. I just want them to see. So we have what is called false positives and false negatives. We see things that aren't there, and we don't see things that are there. And we filter our reality subjectively, and then we label things as good and bad or right and wrong, and we put these moral structures together. Most of the morality come from survival. Anything that allows us to have life, we tend to call good. Anything that brings death tends to call bad. But of course, there's situational ethics with that that's thrown out the tube. We may have to take somebody's life to save somebody else's life. And so situational ethics make all of these things murky. So we set up a structure in society, usually by the people that have power over the people who don't. Anything that challenges that collective group that has more wealth and power usually has the one that set the rules. And the people that don't have the power usually have to follow the rules. But it's basically designed for the sake of protecting whatever people collectively or individually or in groups, or people that have the oppressors over the oppressed have, that challenges them. They set up the rules to make sure that they make it easier on their life. But the reality is that there's always two sides to life. There's support and challenge, and there's pairs of opposites. In fact, the more you're addicted to one, the more you attract the other to keep those things in balance. Maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge. Support being the good and the challenge being the bad in some people's eyes. So I don't find it really productive to label with high rigidity these black and white ideas about good and evil. I don't think that there's good or evil people out there. I think there's just people. And when you challenge their values, they can be pretty mean and tough, and you'll label them bad. And when you support their values, they can be very kind and very nice. And I find that if I walked up to somebody and I said, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, you're always negative, you're never positive, they wouldn't believe it. And the truth is they're not that way. And if I said they're always positive, never negative, always kind, never cruel, always giving, never taking, again, that wouldn't be true. But if I say sometimes they're kind, sometimes they're cruel, sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're peaceful, sometimes they're wrathful, sometimes they're considered, sometimes they're inconsiderate, then it would be true. People run a jump to a conclusion. Somebody can go through for 45 years of their life and do something and be labeled a good person and do one thing that is evil and then be labeled an evil person the rest of their life. It's amazing how that is. So I'm a firm believer in taking and doing inventory and trying to keep the inventory more balanced and see things as individuals, not the personas and labels that we tend to put on people with positives and negatives and goods and evils and things of this nature. I'm not a good person, or am I an evil person? But if you took things out of context, possibly with yellow journalism or whatever, and took a little excerpt out of me and clipped that clip and then labeled that according to society's norms, you might think, well, that's a good person or that's an evil person. But if you took the entire spectrum of everything I do, you'll probably see it all. I'm all of it. I'm the hero and the villain and the saint and the sinner and the good and the bad, all mixed together when I look honestly. I went through the Oxford Dictionary Oxford English Dictionary, and I found that I had 4,628 individual traits in my life. Every one of them that would be considered positive and negative, good and evil, and right and wrong by different people. And sometimes that's the label people put on it. It's easy to label somebody. It's a little bit more effortful to love somebody. That's why in the breakthrough experience, I teach people how to go beyond their labels, all beyond the things that trap them. See, anything that you label really, really bad and evil and wrong, and that you resent, it occupies space and time in your mind, and you don't have a clear consciousness. You're frightened by it. You have a phobia from it. And anything you label really good and really positive and really right, you have an infatuation with, and it can occupy space and time in your mind and run you also. Try to sleep at night when you're highly resentful or highly infatuated, and it's hard to sleep. There's noise in the brain. So the highly polarized labels of black and white, good and evil, right and wrong, or whatever, to me, those absolutes usually mean that you have little awareness, a narrow-mindedness, a small sample size. They say in probabilistic statistics that the greater the sample size, the higher the probability of a mean distribution, which we see both sides and be more objective about it. In our brain, we have more interneurons as we go up the brain to the more advanced part of the brain, the forebrain. And there we have more associations with more probability of have objectivity instead of subjective, emotional, impulsive, and instinctual biases. So I'd rather stop and reflect. And whatever I see in others, I find that I have too. I went through all those 4,628 traits in the dictionary, and I found I had every one of them. So whatever I saw in them that I label positive or negative or good or bad, I had in me. That's why I'm not a good person or a bad person. I'm just a human being. I'm an individual with the potential for it. You support my values, I can be nice as a pussycat. You challenge my values, I can be mean as a tiger. If you put a label, that's good and that's bad, well, then I'm both in different settings. So I don't want to live in a fantasy that I'm trying to get rid of half of myself. And I don't want to put you in a box that say, well, you need to get rid of half of yourself and only show up one side. I find that futile. I've never found anybody to achieve that. I know people that live in a delusion about themselves, and they are in a subjective bias with pride and piousness and think that they're beyond that. But when you look, it's very obvious you can see their other side. And they're the ones blind to it. So sometimes we're blind and we have a subjective bias, a confirmation bias on the things we want to see, and the disconfirmation bias on the things we don't. And you see this in politics, you see this in religion sometimes. And then we go around and we label things. But I'd much rather go beyond that. That's why I teach the breakthrough experience, and I've developed the Demartini method to help people break through the subjective biases that hold people back, that occupy space and time in their mind and run their lives. Because there's no reason why you have to be trapped in these black and white labels. I call that the lowest level. Kohlberg, the psychologist, in the lowest level morality was punishment reward. The next one is subordination to mothers and fathers and preachers and teachers to their ideals in a society instead of living authentically. And then finally, you go to a post-conventional state where you transcend those boxes and go into have a universal awareness. Universal laws, nobody breaks. Human laws, we all break. There's no such thing as a person that doesn't break or infringe on some sort of human law, probably. If you look carefully in your life, that's pretty normal. But universal laws, the law of gravity, nobody breaks. I'd rather study the laws of the scientific laws of the natural laws and try to live my life by those than the transient, local, changing, variable little laws that come and go throughout the days in the society that's basically built out of the idea of people's wounds. When we get wounded, we set up a rule to protect ourselves. But if we go and look at the blessings of what that so-called wound does, we don't have to protect ourselves, and therefore we have a lot more latitude and relativity. The relative terms of and situational ethics helps us transcend those black and white constructs. So I'm a firm believer that it's wiser to look for both sides of things, try to find a middle. I always say that love is a synthesis and synchronicity of these so-called good and bads. It's the both. When you love somebody, you're going to find out that they do things you like and dislike, things you label good and bad, things you think are right and wrong, things that support and challenge you. If you're going to love, if you're going to be mature enough to love, you're going to need to be able to embrace both of those sides in yourself and the people you care about. So beware of immoral hypocrisies. Beware of labeling people. Beware of those mythologies about them. Because sometimes we go and we label somebody, and then a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we find out that they were the catalyst to our greatness. And then we look back and go, wow. I have had in the breakthrough experience hundreds of people, thousands of people in that matter, that have come in that have hated people because of something they thought was evil and bad karma and wrong and stuff. And when they walked out of the program, they actually realized that that was their teacher, and they wouldn't change a thing. And they look back and they go, thank you. And they have tears of gratitude. So I see that every week, and I watch people's life change, and I see the impact and the trajectory impact it has. Instead of being victims of history and labeling things in black and white, they become masters of destiny and allow themselves to see both sides. They have mindfulness instead of mindlessness, and they're able to see whole instead of parts. And instead of putting labels on it, they love. So if that's of interest to you, maybe you could join me at the Breakthrough Experience and learn the method, the Demartini method, where I can show you how to take the things you've labeled good and bad and that have trapped you in a box and made you wounded and make you seek fantasies of good and avoid nightmares of bad and get caught in that illusion of trying to get rid of it. As the Buddha says, the desire for that which is unobtainable, the one, and the desire to avoid the other is futile. It's a source of human suffering. So if you'd like to transcend that, come to the Breakthrough Experience. Let me share with you the principles behind it, and let me show you a method on how to dissolve that so you don't have to be trapped by those moral hypocrisies that most people are trapped by. Until next week, this is Dr. Demartini. I look forward to seeing you next week and also at the Breakthrough Experience. Thank you very much.